Imagine you were born with the ultimate prize, a title, power, and wealth. But this prize comes with a condition. Your blood, the source of your power, is also your executioner. Every breath you take, every illness, even the features of your face, are part of a ticking genetic time bomb. This isn't a horror movie. This is the real fate of the royal daughters of Europe. In this video, we will dissect the mechanism that turned princesses into victims and reveal the faces of those who paid for blood purity with their lives. This wasn't about a single family. It was a pandemic of status that swept across all of Europe. To hold on to power, dynasties locked themselves into a genetic echo chamber. They arranged marriages between uncles and nieces, between first cousins, creating bloodlines that resembled a tangled knot. And at the center of this knot was always a woman, a bargaining chip, a vessel for pure blood. But how exactly did this work on a biological level? Why did women suffer the most, even if they weren't sick themselves? And the main question, did they not understand what they were doing? Or did they understand and simply not care? The answers to these questions are the key to understanding one of the darkest chapters in history. Imagine the genetic code as a deck of cards. For most people, it's a full deck of 52 cards. Inbreeding is like playing with a deck that's missing half its cards. The chance of drawing a bad card, a recessive gene, increases tenfold. Hemophilia, epilepsy, madness, deformities. All of these jokers were almost guaranteed to be drawn from the deck when the blood became too pure. The most famous symbol of this curse was the unsightly protruding jaw. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. Hidden beneath the visible deformities were far more terrifying pathologies. And to see their true scale, we must look into the eyes of a child whose face is known to the world, thanks to the greatest artist in history. Look at this face. This is Margarita Teresa of Spain, the most desirable bride in 17th century Europe. Her portraits by Diego Velázquez were not just art. They were diplomatic dispatches sent regularly to her future groom in Vienna, a groom who also happened to be her maternal uncle and the Holy Roman Emperor. She was the guarantee of peace between the two branches of the Habsburg dynasty, a sweet girl in a lavish dress, but her family tree was not a tree at all, but a tight, suffocating knot. Her father was her mother's uncle. Her maternal grandmother was also her paternal aunt. Of her 8 great-grandparents, 6 were descended from a single couple, Joanna the Mad and Philip the Handsome. The genetic pool had shrunk to a puddle. Geneticists have calculated that her inbreeding coefficient was higher than that of a child born from a direct union between a brother and sister. From birth, her body was a battlefield. Her immune system attacked itself. Her genes waged war on each other. Pause the video and think for a second. Imagine if your every ailment, from a simple cold to a serious illness, was seen by your loved ones not as a matter of chance, but as proof of your corruption and inferiority. What is it like to live in a body that everyone around you considers flawed? From childhood, she was sickly and weak. The chronicles are filled with records of her paleness, fevers, and constant ailments. At 15, this fragile teenager was sent to Vienna and married off to her uncle. In 6 years of marriage, her body endured 4 pregnancies, but only 1 child survived. Each miscarriage, each failed pregnancy, was not just a personal tragedy. It was a failure of the state, undermining her already fragile health. Her famous Habsburg jaw, barely noticeable in childhood, became more pronounced with age, distorting her lovely face. She died at 21. The official report cited fever, but the real cause was etched in her genes. She was killed by her own blood. Margarita's tragedy was that she was a predictable victim of a system incapable of producing healthy offspring. She was a genetic dead end. But nearly 250 years later, another princess would bring a new, even more insidious disease to the royal families of Europe. She wasn't a victim of bad genes in the same way. She was their perfect, outwardly healthy carrier, a silent bomb that would infect an entire empire. The early 20th century. Victoria Eugenie of Battenberg appears on the scene, the granddaughter of Britain's Queen Victoria. For the Spanish throne, poisoned by centuries of inbreeding, her blood seemed like a salvation, a breath of fresh air. But no one knew that this fresh blood carried a hidden charge, the hemophilia gene. Hemophilia is a disease where the blood loses its ability to clot. Any scratch, any bruise could be a death sentence. It was called the royal disease, and its source was known, Queen Victoria herself. She was a carrier. Female carriers almost never suffer from the disease themselves. They simply pass the defective gene to their sons, like a baton carrying death. Victoria Eugenie was just such a perfect, unsuspecting carrier. In 1907, she gave birth to an heir, Alfonso. All of Spain rejoiced. The dynasty was saved. But the euphoria was short-lived. During the infant's ritual circumcision, the doctors realized with horror the bleeding wouldn't stop. The diagnosis came like a death sentence, hemophilia. For King Alfonso XIII, this wasn't just a sick child. This was a defective heir, living proof that he had chosen the wrong woman. The marriage that began as a love story turned into a personal hell. Try to put yourself in his shoes. Your country is on the brink of revolution. Your primary duty is to project strength, stability, and the unshakable power of the dynasty. And your eldest son, the future king, could die from a paper cut. Your wife, whom you once loved, brought this curse into your house. This is not a family drama. This is a catastrophe of the state. And in the eyes of the king, the court, and the entire country, she was the one to blame. The second son was also born with the illness. The royal family was broken. The couple's relationship was completely destroyed. The king grew distant from his wife and lost himself in a series of affairs. This internal rot in the ruling house, this instability, became one of the catalysts that led to the fall of the monarchy and a bloody civil war. A single recessive gene, passed on by one outwardly healthy woman, changed the history of an entire nation. This disaster was no accident. It was the result of a conscious choice. They knew the risks, yet they continued to play this genetic roulette. The biggest misconception is to think they were fools who didn't notice the consequences. They saw everything. But for them, sick children and wives dying in childbirth were not tragedies, but acceptable costs. Because a princess was not a person, she was an asset. And this asset had three main functions. First, territory. A princess was a living deed to a province or an entire kingdom. Marrying her was the most effective way to expand an empire without firing a single shot. Why risk war, losing soldiers and gold, when you could simply marry your son to the right heiress? Her personal happiness, her health, none of it mattered in this transaction. She was a living map, redrawing borders. Second, monopoly. In-law marriages created a closed club. Habsburgs married Habsburgs. Bourbons married Bourbons. This was a guarantee that power, influence, and wealth would remain within the family. Any outsider with different blood was a threat to this system. Incest was their primary political firewall, cutting off competitors. It was a ruthless mechanism for maintaining control. And third, and most importantly, ideology. They genuinely believed their blood was special, blue, almost of divine origin. Mixing it with the blood of lower nobility, let alone commoners, was tantamount to defiling a sacred relic. They sought a distilled, absolutely pure blood, and in pursuit of this illusory purity, they achieved its genetic disintegration. They became victims of their own propaganda. The level of cynicism was off the charts. The system was perfectly calibrated. The health of future generations was consciously sacrificed for political stability in the here and now. It wasn't a bug. It was the main feature of absolute monarchy. But any system that devours itself is doomed to fail. In the end, the dynasties that most feared losing power destroyed themselves from within, producing weak, sick, and mad rulers. Their story is a textbook example of self-destruction. The Spanish branch of the Habsburgs ended with Charles VI, the last pathetic product of the system. He was so degenerated that he could not have children, a genetic dead end. The Spanish Bourbons who replaced them lost the throne, and the catalyst for their fall was the tragedy brought by Victoria Eugenie and her hemophilia gene. The Romanovs in Russia faced the very same problem. Tsarevich Alexei, their only heir, carried the same curse. His illness became a factor of colossal political instability. That shook the empire on the eve of revolution. The The system designed to hold power forever became a machine for its own destruction. History delivered its verdict. The laws of biology proved stronger than royal decrees. This collapse leaves us with three fundamental lessons that are still relevant today. First, the danger of the echo chamber. When any system, be it a family, a corporation, or an entire state, closes itself off, it stops receiving new information, new genes, new ideas. It begins to stew in its own juices and inevitably degrades. Diversity is not just a buzzword, it's a fundamental condition for survival. Second, the illusion of total control. The desire to manage absolutely everything breeds monstrous fragility. The Habsburgs tried to control the future through blood. They built a complex system of marital alliances to guarantee stability. But in the end, they created a structure that was doomed to collapse from a single random mutation, from one defective gene. And third, the price of dehumanization. The moment you start seeing people not as individuals, but as functions, as assets, as bargaining chips, you open Pandora's box. A system that treats a human being as a means to an end ultimately destroys both itself and the very people it uses. It devours its own foundation. And now, the main question for you. Having analyzed all this, what do you think was at the core of this ruthless machine? Was it the cold, conscious calculation of monarchs who knew exactly what they were doing and considered it an acceptable price? Or was it tragic ignorance, a blind, fanatical faith in their special blood that simply wouldn't let them see the obvious truth? Write just one word in the comments, calculation or ignorance. Let's see which one gets more votes. Thank you for watching. The stories of these women are not just dark fairy tales from a distant past. They are a timeless and crucial reminder of what the pursuit of illusory purity and absolute power leads to. Subscribe to the channel to continue dissecting the hidden mechanisms of history with us. And be sure to watch this video, where we break down how a single forged map changed the fate of Europe.